This story is more of an urbex experience. However, it did happen during a sleepover. It took place in Alton, which is a small countryside town in England. The town doesn't really have much to offer for young people growing up there, and for that reason, it encouraged many rebellious kids like myself to find mischievous things to do in our spare time, often without our parents' knowledge. I'm not an easily scared individual, but this experience shook me up for a whole month. I remember it as clear as glass. It was a Friday. My friend, who I will call Jack, asked me in math class if I wanted to do a sleepover at his place for the weekend. I was hesitant at first because I wasn't really a fan of sleepovers, but then he persuaded me by mentioning that there was this abandoned hospital to explore in the woods. I jumped at the idea because I was really into all things scary and had heard about this same abandoned hospital in a Mr. Nightmare video. The thought had crossed my mind to go explore it since I lived in the same town, and this would present the perfect opportunity. Of course, I said yes, and then Jack told me to be at his place at noon on Saturday. I got home after a tiring day and did some further research about this abandoned hospital online. It was called the Robertson House. After scrolling for a few seconds, I came across more YouTube videos of creators exploring the hospital, which I was surprised to see. One of the videos began giving an explanation of how this place was used to treat British soldiers who had returned from the South African Boer War. It was then reopened in 1908 and was used as a treatment center for children who suffered from tuberculosis, but for whatever reason it got shut down and was sold off in 2001. Since then, there have been stories circling the internet of paranormal activity happening within the building, from the voices of children being heard down the hallways to loud taps and bangs on the walls. I was always skeptical of the paranormal, so I didn't read too much into it. The next day, I made it to Jack's house in the afternoon, and we quickly ate dinner, barely able to contain our excitement. When we left, we told Jack's mom that we were only going to the town center and wouldn't be gone for more than a couple of hours. His mother nodded, and we set off toward the hospital. After 20 minutes, we got to the forest that supposedly led up to the hospital's estate. It was a quiet, isolated area. As the twigs snapped beneath our feet, we both picked up on just how silent it suddenly became out here. Despite being with a friend, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that had hit my stomach since entering these woods. I was hoping that at any second I would hear the sound of birds, or leaves rustling, or the wind blowing through the trees. But that wish never came true. It was like all life ceased to exist in this area. I was almost regretting my decision to come here. However, I carried on, staying on high alert until we finally came across the towering bricks that I had seen in the YouTube videos. Tall grass and weeds covered the bottom half of the building, and every window was boarded up with graffiti splashed all over them. Except for one that stood out. It was like being in a scene in the show, The Haunting of Hill House. Jack strolled ahead of me because he could see that I was losing my confidence. He told me, "The entrance is this way," and pointed toward the one window that hadn't been boarded up. Jack climbed inside first, being careful not to cut himself, and then I followed. We both stood by the window preparing our phone flashlights before slowly stepping into the dark hallway. I noticed more graffiti littering the walls, as well as spider eggs hanging from the doorways, which Jack pointed out to me and jokingly said, "You do not want to crack one of these open." I was too fearful to laugh in the moment. We both noticed that there was a door in the hallway that was halfway open. I pointed my flashlight to the aperture, and that's when Jack dared me to walk in there without my phone, to which I strongly declined. I said to him that if anyone was going to go in there alone, it would be him. He agreed to do it, but not without calling me a massive coward for refusing. I watched nervously as he approached the door, pushed it open, and then turned his phone light off. I then saw his figure slowly disappear into the room, and then an eerie silence followed. I waited outside clutching my phone, thinking about calling it a night, when suddenly I hear Jack yell, "What the fuck?" I heard genuine fear in his voice, so I knew he wasn't joking around. I swiftly rushed in and saw Jack in the middle of the room, looking down at his feet with his back to me. I asked him what was wrong, and when he turned to look at me, I could see a look of pure fear in his eyes. He signaled to me what he was staring at, and when I saw myself, my blood ran cold. Inches away from Jack's feet was a pile of bird carcasses stacked on top of each other. Some were old and decomposed, while others looked fresh. We heard what sounded like hooves crashing down above our heads. Jack and I looked at each other, confirming to me that we were both hearing the same thing. "Yo, fuck this," I said, and booked it toward the exit. As I walked past the staircase, Jack yelled out, "Hey, I still want to see what's upstairs." "Have you lost your mind? I know you heard those footsteps too. There could be a squatter roaming around up there." He ignored me, and without hesitation, he shouted from the bottom of the staircase, "Hey, is anyone up there? We mean you no harm." An uncomfortable vibe followed. He then took his first step. The stairs creaked loudly as he did. My anxiety was stirring with each step he took. Even though I wanted nothing more than to get the hell out of there, I didn't want him to go alone. I approached the bottom step, but as I got there, Jack said, "Don't. You're not going up there alone. The stairs will collapse if you take another step. Just stay here." Fine. This is a really stupid idea. I'm gonna wait for you outside." He nodded to me, then disappeared out of sight. And then I made my way to the window that we entered through and carefully hoisted myself out of the building. I waited for a good minute, wondering if I had made the right choice to leave Jack in there. Suddenly, I heard the sound of sprinting, getting louder and louder, coming from inside the building. That's when I saw Jack through the window, running toward me. He then jumped out, faster than a cheetah. Before I could even ask any questions, he told me to run and to not stop. I followed after him, running faster than I ever had before, with adrenaline pumping through my veins. After what felt like a half an hour, we made it to the town's center and stopped to catch our breath. Once I regained my composure, I asked him what the hell happened in there. Jack told me that after he got to the top of the stairs, he saw a room directly in front of him and could see small glimmers of light at the bottom of the door. He then put two and two together and determined that this was the area where we had heard the footsteps coming from. He continued the story and said that when he opened the door, he pointed his phone's light into the room and saw a huge pentagram painted on the floor with candles surrounding it. When he backed out of the room and into the hallway, he then saw several robed figures standing at the end of the hallway, looking at him. That's when he decided that he had enough excitement for one night, and it was time to leave. We chose to not speak a word about this to anyone. To this day, this experience still sends chills down my spine. Who were those people in the hospital with us? Was it some kind of cult that lives out in those woods? Quite frankly, I don't need to know that badly. I stay far away from those woods now, and I advise anyone to never allow their curiosity to get the better of them in situations like this. There are some things that are better left in the forest. When I was around 10 years old, I had been invited for the first time to a sleepover at my friend's house. We'll call her Abby. She lives pretty far away from me, so whenever we hung out, it always felt like a special occasion. I had just started becoming brave enough to sleep at other people's houses, and since Abby was one of my oldest friends, this would be a trial run of sorts. Here's a little background about Abby's family. She is the youngest of 4. Her oldest brother, who is about 10 years older than us, has pretty severe autism and continues to live full-time with Abby's parents. He was always a bit of a wild card, and as a 10-year-old girl, I always felt a little anxious around him. Anyways, there were 3 of us girls at the slumber party. We decided to sleep on the main floor of her house so we could stay up late watching movies. I chose to sleep on a couch that was perpendicular to a wall of windows that overlooked the backyard. The other girls were sharing a mattress on the floor. We threw on a DVD, but we all eventually fell asleep during the movie. Sleeping away from home has never been easy for me. I wake up frequently, and sometimes can't even fall asleep to begin with. This night was one of those times. After about 2 hours, something stirred me back to consciousness. When I came to, I was bombarded by the bright glow of the TV. After my eyes adjusted, I noticed something outside that hadn't been there before. There was someone sitting in one of the deck chairs and had positioned it to face directly toward where the 3 of us were sleeping. He hadn't noticed that I was awake, but seeing him made my heart race. I stayed totally still, watching him. It was dark, but I could still tell that he was studying us and smirking. Terrified, I watched him for a few more minutes before turning myself into the couch cushion and closing my eyes. Some time passed, until I finally mustered up the courage to look again. He was gone. To this day, I have no idea who it was that had gotten into Abby's backyard and sat on her deck and watched us in the middle of the night, but the image of him sitting there, grinning, still haunts me. I thought it may have been her brother, but from what I could see, this man had dark hair and dark eyes. Abby's brother has blonde hair and blue eyes. They looked nothing alike. Luckily, we all made it to the next morning unharmed, but this was the last time I ever spent the night at Abby's house. I was 11 years old when this occurred. It was a weekend, and I was supposed to spend it at my friend's house. For 11-year-old me, this was very exciting. Having been slammed with schoolwork the entire week, I was to spend what I believed to be Friday night sleeping over, and the entirety of Saturday, and would return home that evening. What made it even better was the fact that her parents had an event they could not avoid, and trusted us to stay in their 2-story house for the 6 hours they would be gone for. Back then, the idea of spending the whole night alone with my friend was great. No interference, and a whole 6 hours of games and movies on their huge TV. But it turns out, my friend had other ideas. I arrived at her house just short of 8 p.m. It was already pretty dark out, and her parents had waited for me to arrive before telling us about the emergency contacts, dinner, and such. They also reminded us to make sure their 4-year-old Labrador was inside by a certain time, as it was supposed to rain later on, and his kennel had a few loose panels which leaked when it rained. After they left, we watched a few shows, had dinner, and were chilling in her living room playing cards. That's when Sid, my friend, had the ingenious idea of exploring a fenced-in plot of land that was just down the street. The area was overgrown with plants and weeds. We got the dog inside, grabbed the keys, and left the house to make the short 10-minute trip. It would have been around 10 p.m. by this point. In retrospect, this is where we still had a chance to avoid this particular encounter, but being the curious and daring 11-year-olds we were, we ventured out anyways. Rather uneventfully, we arrived and climbed over the fence. Luckily for us, the fencing was run down enough in certain places for us to make it through pretty easily. Once inside, Sid suggested that we sit a few meters away from each other for as long as we could, until one of us was too scared to continue. Remember, we were both 11. This was our idea of fun. We faced each other and walked backwards until there was just enough light to see the general silhouette of the other. After what seemed to be a good 10 minutes, I saw Sid rise up and start walking toward me. She seemed to be walking rather fast as well, jumping over rocks and debris at a daring pace, even getting cut by some thorns in the process. She came up to me, and just as I was about to laugh at her and call her out for being scared, she told me to get up because she had to go feed Shaggy, the Labrador. I remember being very confused because her parents had already filled his bowl with food before they left, but I saw the look on her face. I had never seen her this pale before. It looked like she had just seen a ghost. So without asking any questions, I said okay, and we made our way back over the fence, albeit in a very tense and quick manner. The moment my feet touched the ground, I felt Sid grab my arm, and we began sprinting down the street. To put things into perspective, I had a bruise where she grabbed me for the next 2 weeks. We ran like hell, arriving at her house and went through the metal gate in her front yard. She handed me the house key and told me to unlock the front door while she deadbolted the gate's various locks. It was at this point I was starting to panic. But we got into the house, where Sid then proceeded to run around, locking and closing all the windows and doors, as well as pulling the curtains shut. I was very confused as to why she was doing all this, and so was Shaggy, who just stood there watching her. After about 10 minutes, she came back into the living room. With a very intense expression, she explained to me that the reason that she had done all this was because while we were sitting apart back at the lot, she happened to glance a few meters to my right and saw a figure crouching behind some bushes. She thought she was imagining it at first, until it crept closer to where I was sitting. They seemed to be unaware that she was watching them. She didn't want to startle me or let the person know that she had seen them, so she made up the story about having to feed her dog so we could get out of there without alerting the figure who was still crouching there. After hearing this, I was quite shaken, and we hugged for a few minutes, deciding not to tell our parents, as they had very much warned us not to go out, and we didn't want this to be the last sleepover we had together. So we thought it was best to keep this to ourselves. We peeked out of the window into the streets, which seemed to be empty as far as we could see. We put this event behind us and decided to continue having a fun sleepover. I would love to say that this is where things ended, but what happens next has stuck with me to this day, and I still get scared just thinking about it. To give you an idea of the layout of her house, a concrete wall surrounded the home. It had one entrance in the front where the metal gate was. The house itself had 3 potential entry points. The obvious 2 are the front and back door. The third was an exterior basement entrance. Those of you who live up north will know what I'm talking about. It looks like a cellar on the side of the house. It had a metal door with an inside lock. So an hour or so after the incident, we were upstairs in Sid's bedroom playing games on her computer when we heard the dog barking downstairs. Shaggy was growling at something. Keep in mind that her dog was mostly friendly. He rarely ever growled or barked aggressively. Sid went to go check on him. When she returned a short time later, she informed me that the dog was standing near the front door, growling. We were very confused. This was unusual for him to do. We thought maybe a stray dog or cat might have wandered onto the front porch or something, so we decided to go to the balcony that was attached to her room, which overlooked the front yard and out into the street. Instead of seeing what we assumed to be a stray animal, we looked down to see someone standing in the front lawn. In the very limited light we had, we could make out heavy layers of clothing and a head full of hair that looked very matted. Shaggy had joined us on the balcony and was wanting to be let outside. We crouched, and just as we were about to discuss what we should do, we heard what sounded like the front door rattling, as if someone was trying to open it. We crept back downstairs, only to realize that the person was now at one of the windows next to the door and was trying to open it. The realization hit that they were trying to find a way inside by going around the perimeter. Just as we were about to retreat back upstairs, my friend grabbed me again, and in a hushed tone, she told me that she had forgotten to lock the basement door. We both looked at each other. If the intruder managed to get inside the basement, there would only be a flimsy lock on the inner basement door, separating us from him. At this point, we heard more windows being shook behind the house. We were lucky that he had chosen the opposite side of the house from where the exterior basement door was located, but he would eventually reach it. Sid told me to wait in the hallway with Shaggy while she went outside to lock the exterior basement door. She informed me that if she was caught, I was to let the dog loose. We were both terrified, and since we didn't have time to think about it, I stood guard while she left through the front door and ran around to the other side of the house. I could still hear the windows being shaken as the intruder was still looking for an opening. I then heard Sid fumbling with a lock before finally managing to turn the deadbolt. She then quickly ran back inside. Trust me, those few seconds were nerve-wracking. We then shut the front door and locked it, and just as we did, we heard the exterior door rattle harshly. If she had not gone out to lock it when she did, the intruder would have found his way inside. While he tried opening all the other windows, we made our way back upstairs to the balcony. When we looked down, we saw him once again, standing in the front lawn. However, this time, we could see his head was tilted back. It appeared that he was looking right at us. However, we knew that it was too dark for him to be able to spot us. We had turned off all the lights in the bedroom beforehand. He then started laughing. He then got down on all fours and crawled around the front lawn of the house, all the while still laughing like a lunatic. In retrospect, this was a very disturbing individual. We should have absolutely called the police, but being the terrified 11-year-olds we were, we still didn't want to get into trouble. We had led this crazy person back here by breaking the rules. He continued crawling around for nearly half an hour. He then stood up, then made his way over to Shaggy's kennel in the corner. He used it to hoist himself over the wall and jumped down on the other side. We were still standing on the balcony, waiting and listening to see if he would return. But fortunately, we had seen the last of him that night. At around 2 a.m, her parents finally returned. The next day, they were very confused as to why all the doors and windows were closed and why there was mud on the front doorknob. We told them that we were playing hide and seek and we wanted the house to be as dark as possible. We should have told them the truth. Although we were scared, we didn't understand just how dangerous this situation was. God only knows what that man would have done to us if he had managed to get inside.